At my own mom's funeral, my sister sneered at my dress, whispering just loud enough for a few people around us to hear. She couldn't even afford something decent for today. Her words cut deeper than she could ever know. What June didn't realize was that the dress she mocked wasn't just any dress. It was from my own designer label, the company I built with my own hands. She mocked me without knowing she was really mocking the very brand I own. Stick with me. The church was filled with muted sobs, the smell of lilies heavy in the air, and the kind of silence that presses down on you. My mother lay in her casket at the front, a woman who had spent her whole life trying to keep peace between us. And there was June, standing in her loud, flashy outfit, dripping with gold, making sure every eye landed on her. I had chosen something simple, a black dress with clean lines. To anyone else, it might have looked plain. To me, it was perfect. It was my own design, something I created for myself. June leaned toward a cousin and said in that fake whisper she always used when she wanted the room to hear, "Can you believe she showed up in that?" Mom deserved better. I didn't turn my head, didn't flinch. I kept my eyes on the coffin, my hands curled into fists, hidden in my lap. This wasn't the place to answer her. Not here, not in front of Mom. But her words didn't float away. They lodged deep, sharper than they should have been, because grief was already carving me open. It wasn't the first time she had humiliated me. June had been doing this since we were kids, cutting me down, needing to be the one everyone admired, the one everyone talked about. She had a way of turning every moment into hers. Birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, it never mattered. I left this town years ago, not just for opportunity, but for air. Away from her, away from the constant reminder that I was the shadow to her light. But here I was, back in the same church we had grown up attending, sitting in the same pews, and she hadn't changed. I realized then that she never would. I stole a glance around at the faces in the crowd, neighbors, old friends, family. A few darted looks at me, eyes shifting, maybe pitying, maybe believing her words. That was the part that burned the most. I wasn't ashamed of my dress. I was ashamed that my sister would use our mother's funeral as her stage to embarrass me. I pressed my lips together and let silence be my answer. Not because I was weak, but because I refused to let her drag me into a public scene over something as shallow as clothes. Not when my mother was lying just feet away. Still, I could feel something shifting inside me, a quiet vow-taking shape. June thought she'd won again. Another small victory in a lifelong war only she seemed to be fighting. But she had no idea who I had become outside this place. She had no idea the strength I carried now. And she certainly didn't know the truth about the dress. Growing up, my sister June and I could not have been more different. She thrived on attention, needing eyes on her wherever she went, while I was more content to sit quietly in the background. From the time we were little, she learned how to use appearances like armor, new shoes, expensive handbags, the latest trends, and she wore them like weapons too. If she could make me feel small with a single glance or a careless comment, she would. I stopped counting the times she pointed out what I didn't have, what I couldn't afford, or how I never looked the part she thought a daughter of our family should. I learned early on that competing with her was a losing game. June had a way of twisting every situation to make herself shine brighter, and the more I tried to keep up, the more invisible I felt. By high school, she was the one everyone noticed, the one with the best dress at prom, the girl people remembered at reunions. And me? I slipped away quietly, keeping my focus on the things that mattered to me. My work, my independence, my freedom. Leaving town was the best choice I ever made. I didn't announce it or make a show of it. I just packed my things, took the chance, and built a life elsewhere. Over the years, I created something solid, something I could stand on, without the need to flaunt it in anyone's face. Success came to me in slow, steady steps, the kind that no one saw happening because I wasn't interested in broadcasting it. I was fine with that. Privacy gave me peace, and peace was something I had never had while living in my sister's shadow. Still, distance didn't erase the past. Every phone call home carried hints of comparison. Mom would tell me June had a new car, June redecorated her house, June was wearing something everyone admired at church last Sunday. She never meant it cruelly. She was just trying to talk about both her daughters. But the balance was always uneven, and in her efforts to keep things light, she never called June out on her barbs. Whenever June teased me or dismissed me or made me feel like an outsider in my own family, Mom tried smoothing it over instead of correcting it. "She doesn't mean it like that," she'd say. "You know how your sister is." I learned not to expect defense. That history was heavy on my shoulders as I walked into the church for the funeral. My dress was black, simple in cut, elegant without being loud. It wasn't off a rack, though. This was a piece that had been crafted especially for me, tailored by my own company. The fabric was rich, the stitching perfect, the kind of garment only a practiced I would know wasn't ordinary. I didn't wear it to impress anyone. I wore it because it was mine, because it felt right. No one needed to know its price, or the fact that the label it came from belonged to me. I wasn't there to prove anything. I was there for Mom. But walking through those doors, I knew June would see only what she wanted to see. And what she saw was never about me. It was about the mirror she needed to keep polished for herself. The church was heavy with silence as people filed past the casket, some pausing to murmur a prayer, others laying down small bouquets. I kept my eyes fixed forward, hands folded, trying to focus on memories of Mom's laugh instead of the ache in my chest. But just behind me, June's voice sliced through the hush. She wasn't whispering to one person. She was projecting, making sure several relatives heard. "I don't know why she would wear something like that today," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "It looks like she pulled it off a clearance rack." I felt the words settle over the room like dust. Conversations faltered. Eyes shifted toward me, then away again, as if glancing too long would only deepen my embarrassment. A tightness spread across my chest, but I refused to turn around. I kept my chin up, face calm, though every muscle in my body begged to react. The silence that followed was louder than her comment. Through the corner of my vision, I caught a glimpse of June. She had chosen a dress that glimmered under the dim lights, sequins catching every flicker of movement. Jewelry clinked softly as she adjusted her bracelets, making sure they were seen. Even her shoes, sharp stilettos in a glossy shade, were meant to scream for attention. It was as if she wanted to be remembered more vividly than the woman lying in the coffin. The realization hit me with a force I wasn't prepared for. My sister wasn't just being careless or insensitive. She was performing. She had turned our mother's funeral into a runway, and my supposed cheap outfit was just another prop for her to contrast herself against. In her mind, she wasn't simply honoring Mom. She was using the occasion to elevate herself, to shine brighter while casting me in shadow. That thought stung more than her words. I had braced myself for grief, for tears, for the hollow space Mom's absence would leave. But I hadn't braced myself for this. My own sister turning mourning into spectacle, making sure even in death, Mom's presence couldn't compete with her need to dominate. I kept still, but inside something cracked. I understood in that moment that June's cruelty wasn't thoughtless. It was deliberate, sharpened like a knife, aimed at me when I was most vulnerable. She knew the eyes of family were on us, and she used them as her audience. I felt exposed, but I also felt a strange calm settle over me. I wouldn't give her what she wanted. Not a flinch, not a word. I would carry my dignity through the day, even if it cost me everything to hold it. And so I sat, listening to the echo of her laughter as she leaned in closer to another relative, making sure they shared the joke. The sound mingled with the quiet sobs in the room, creating a cruel dissonance that I would never forget. It was the moment I realized my sister valued her image more than she valued family, more than she valued respect for our mother's memory. I sat frozen in that pew, every nerve sparking, but I kept my face still. There was no way I would give June the scene she wanted. Not here, not in front of Mom's coffin. My silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint, a choice made out of love for the woman we were supposed to be honoring. But inside, my chest burned. Memories came back like unwelcome guests. I could see myself at a middle school recital, clutching a violin while June whispered to a friend in the row behind, "She looks ridiculous up there." I could hear her snicker at Thanksgiving dinners, turning every stumble of mine into a joke for the table. At birthdays, she found ways to belittle whatever gift I unwrapped, laughing like it was harmless teasing, though it never felt harmless. I had endured so many of her jabs, so many years of being cast as the dull sister while she soaked up attention. I told myself to let it roll off, told myself Mom didn't need more conflict between us. But this moment felt different. This wasn't a family gathering where her words would be forgotten the next day. This was the last goodbye to the woman who had raised us both. And still, she couldn't resist cutting me down. It was no longer just about rivalry or old wounds. It was about respect. June had crossed a line, turning grief into ammunition. The realization left a sharp taste in my mouth. For once, I wasn't going to let her walk away smirking, certain she had put me in my place. I drew a slow breath, eyes fixed on the flowers at the altar, and made a quiet promise to myself. Her cruelty would not go unanswered. Maybe not today, maybe not in front of these people, but the balance between us was going to shift. I felt it settle deep in my bones. This time, June wouldn't get away with it. After the service, everyone drifted back to the family house. The air smelled of casseroles and coffee, dishes lined the counter, and people clustered in small groups with plates balanced in their hands. Some shared memories of Mom. Funny little stories from church picnics or quiet moments from the neighborhood. There was laughter, but it was softened by the weight of loss. For a while, I let myself blend into the background, listening more than speaking, keeping my grief close and quiet. June, on the other hand, positioned herself right in the center of the living room, voice rising above the steady hum of conversation. She launched into stories about her latest trip, her new furniture, the promotion she claimed had doubled her income. She moved from one circle of relatives to another, never letting attention slip away from her. Each word came coated in pride, as though her accomplishments were proof of her worth. She wore her role as the responsible daughter like a badge, acting as though she had carried the family through every hardship, while I stood at the edges like a spectator. I caught the way she slid me into her stories too, not directly, never openly cruel, but always with a bite. If someone mentioned how beautiful the service had been, she would smile thinly and say, "Well, I tried to make sure things looked right. You know how I like details." Her eyes would flick briefly in my direction, the implication sharp, that I hadn't lifted a finger. If someone complimented her outfit, she'd laugh and add, "It's important to look put together, especially on days like this." Not everyone understands that. Again, a glance at me. The relatives laughed awkwardly, not sure how to respond. The more she talked, the heavier the tension became. People weren't blind. They noticed the undercurrent, the way her words brushed against me like thorns. Some tried to redirect, changing topics or asking me gentle questions, but June always found a way to pull the spotlight back. She thrived on the little digs, confident no one would challenge her outright. I kept quiet. My fork moved across the plate in slow motions, more to distract myself than to eat. Every part of me wanted to speak up, but I held my tongue. This wasn't the time. The house was full of people mourning my mother. I wouldn't cheapen her memory by sparring with my sister in front of them. Still, my silence wasn't surrender, it was patience. I was waiting, biding my time. Then, near the hallway, I caught her voice again, this time sharper, more careless. She was talking to two cousins, both nodding politely as she leaned in. "She still dresses like she's broke," June said, loud enough for me to hear from across the room. If I were her, I'd be embarrassed. Her words hit me like a stone. I didn't move, didn't let her see the flicker of hurt in my eyes. But inside, the promise I'd made earlier only grew stronger. June thought she was untouchable, that her barbs would always land without consequence. She didn't know how wrong she was. I sat in the corner of the crowded living room, the sound of forks against plates and soft conversations swirling around me, and let my thoughts wander back over the last decade. When I walked away from this town years ago, I didn't just leave June's shadow. I stepped into a future no one here had expected from me. I had started small, sketching designs on the backs of receipts, sewing late into the night in a cramped apartment. What began as a handful of pieces sold at local markets grew into something far bigger. With every season, my work gained traction, until eventually my clothing line became a name whispered in the same circles as the designers I used to admire from afar. Even now, I lived simply. My house wasn't a mansion, my car wasn't flashy. I chose quiet, and I chose privacy. Success, to me, wasn't about flaunting. It was about independence, about never needing to measure myself against anyone else again. My wealth didn't define me, and that's exactly why June had no idea who I had become. To her, I was still the sister who lagged behind, who didn't measure up. And yet, the irony of this day pressed hard against me. The dress she had ridiculed at the church, the one she dismissed as cheap and unworthy, that dress was mine. My design, hand-stitched by the very team I built, made with fabric that cost more than her entire glittering ensemble. It wasn't something anyone else could buy. It was custom, created for me alone. The clean lines, the quiet elegance, the strength in its simplicity, everything about it reflected who I was now. June saw only what she wanted to see, and in doing so, she mocked not just me, but the success I had quietly earned. I let that truth sit inside me, like a secret ember I could stoke when I needed warmth. I didn't need to shout it across the room. didn't need to correct her or prove myself. But I knew sooner or later her words would find their weight. She had humiliated me at the most painful moment of my life, using Mom's farewell as a stage for her own vanity. That wouldn't pass without consequence. I glanced at her across the room, laughing loudly with a glass in her hand, basking in the polite attention of our cousins. She had no idea she was playing into her own undoing. Her arrogance was blinding, and she thought her role as the polished sister was secure. But she had no idea that the ground beneath her was already shifting. I stayed composed, smiling faintly when someone approached me with condolences, answering softly, never letting my resolve show on my face. But in my mind, the pieces were already falling into place. I wouldn't strike back in anger or create a spectacle. No, what I planned would be quiet, precise, undeniable. The moment would come when June would finally see me, not the caricature she had built in her head, but the woman I had become. And when it came, she would regret every word. At the gathering, my cousins started praising June's outfit. She beamed, announcing it was fresh from some high-end label. Everyone's attention turned toward her, and she soaked it in. I sat quietly, observing, keeping my calm. When the chatter slowed, I asked gently if she actually knew much about fashion labels. My words were soft, but I could feel the weight land in the room. For a brief second, June's expression faltered, then she laughed it off, waving me away. She scoffed that I'd never understand real fashion, her voice dripping with condescension. The room fell still. I could see relatives shifting uncomfortably, sensing something was different this time. Normally, I would have let her words slide, but I didn't look away. Instead, I let her ridicule hang in the air, watching as she filled the silence with more bragging, oblivious to the tension thickening around her. I didn't react, not yet. I let my patience steady me, studying her, knowing the moment was building. My cousins glanced between us, waiting. For once, it wasn't June who held the room. It was the quiet edge in my voice that had unsettled everyone, even her. I stayed still, letting the anticipation grow, because I knew when I finally spoke, it wouldn't be wasted. I rose slowly, steadying myself before I spoke. My voice carried without strain, and everyone's conversations hushed. I didn't look at June directly at first. I let my eyes sweep over the room, taking in the expectant faces of relatives who had watched her chip away at me all afternoon. Then I met her gaze, calm and unwavering. "This dress," I said evenly, brushing my hand lightly against the fabric, "wasn't bought. It's mine. My own label." The room shifted, a murmur running through the air as my words settled. I wasn't raising my tone, but I didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything she had ever thrown at me. I paused, letting silence linger. Then I added, almost softly, "And that brand you just boasted about? My company acquired them last year." The sound that followed wasn't just shock. It was a collective intake of breath that filled the entire room. Conversations that had carried so much judgment moments before were gone, replaced by stunned stillness. I could see relatives exchanging glances, jaws slightly open, as if they weren't sure whether they'd heard me correctly. June's face drained of color, her confidence cracking. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but no sound came. For the first time, she was speechless. The very stage she had claimed to mock me became her undoing, and all I had to do was tell the truth. The air felt heavy, but it wasn't my burden anymore. It was hers. June's mouth opened and closed like she was searching for air, words tangled in her throat. Her cheeks flushed deep red, creeping all the way to the tips of her ears. For someone who had always wielded quick wit and cruel jabs like weapons, she suddenly looked small, cornered, and unprepared. I didn't need to press further. The truth had already done more than years of her insults ever could. I caught the shift in the room, the way our aunts and cousins no longer looked at me with quiet pity. Their eyes softened, carrying something closer to respect, almost pride. For so long, June had been the loud one, the showpiece of the family. But in that moment, her glitter dulled, and the silence spoke volumes. She tried to laugh it off, a brittle sound that cracked halfway through. "Well, I mean, who could have guessed?" she muttered, clutching her purse like a lifeline. Her hands trembled as she avoided my eyes, her mask slipping no matter how hard she tugged it back into place. I kept my composure, the same way I had when she mocked me earlier. I looked around the room, then back to her, and said quietly, "Mom always told me to let actions speak louder than words." My voice wasn't sharp, it was steady, a reminder rather than a victory chant. The weight of those words hung heavy. I could almost see the memory of our mother flicker in people's eyes. grounding the moment in something deeper than just humiliation. This wasn't revenge for the sake of pride. It was balance finally restored. June's jaw tightened, and she muttered something inaudible before turning sharply toward the door. Her heels clicked furiously against the hardwood floor, echoing like an angry drumbeat until the slam of the door ended it all. The house felt different once she was gone. The tension that had clung to every corner seemed to lift. A quiet settled in, not awkward this time, but thoughtful. For once, no one rushed to chase after her, to excuse her behavior or smooth over her sharp edges. I stayed seated, hands folded in my lap, breathing evenly. I hadn't gloated, hadn't thrown her cruelty back at her with the same venom she always used on me. All I had done was tell the truth, and the truth had done all the work for me. When the last of the guests trickled out and the house fell silent, I slipped away to the room I grew up in. The wallpaper was faded, the shelves still held pieces of my childhood. Worn paperbacks, a chipped lamp, a picture of Mom smiling in the garden. Sitting on the edge of that familiar bed, I let the quiet surround me. There wasn't any sense of victory coursing through me, no satisfaction in watching June unravel. Instead, a calm I hadn't known in years settled in. I hadn't needed to match her sharp words, or humiliate her in return. By staying steady, I had honored myself, and more importantly, I had honored Mom. I thought about all the times I'd let June's jabs cut into me. School dances where she picked apart my outfits, dinners where she found ways to make me small, birthdays where she turned attention into a weapon. Those memories had weighed on me for so long, but sitting in that room, I felt them finally lose their grip. Her approval had been something I chased for years without even realizing it. But now, I understood I never needed it. Mom's love had been enough. My own strength was enough. The life I built quietly, without the need for applause, was proof enough. I made a choice that night. I wouldn't chase closeness with June anymore, not when it came at the cost of my peace. I'd carry forward the parts of my family that mattered. The warmth of Mom's laughter, the way she always told me to stand tall without shouting, to let kindness and truth carry me further than cruelty ever could. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling where the paint had cracked with time. My heart felt lighter, unburdened. The world outside that room might never understand the weight of what happened that day, but I did. That day, I learned revenge doesn't always come from shouting. It comes from standing in your truth, even when someone tries to strip it away. Do you think I was right to finally let go of my sister and protect my peace, or should I have given her another chance? Tell me your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories.